It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Over 117,000 people visited memorials installed in Seoul to pay their respects to the 156 people who died in the tragic accident that occurred last month in the nightlife district of Itaewon in Seoul. It's an incident that is difficult to process for the Korean public, and we discuss how society is trying to make sense of what happened and how it's processing the overwhelming sadness of losing our young. Joining us today for the discussion is Dr. Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyung University, and Dr. CHEY, Professor of Korean Psychological Association. Thank you both so much for joining us today. My first question is addressed to you, Professor Song. Now, society is really trying to make sense of what happened that night on October 29th. And, well, first of all, investigations. Now, there's a lot of focus on the police at the moment. The police reportedly received dozens of calls that night asking them to intervene, and people actually worried that there would be a mass accident. How do you think this is going to be investigated? And if they are found to have been negligent, then what would then be the consequences?
Well, obviously, there has to be thorough investigations as to why those warning signs were either ignored or did not lead to necessary actions, whether it was a failure of the system or negligence of people who are in charge. There were multiple signs and reports coming from multiple sources. And there were a glut of CCTVs available to the authorities. But the collaboration between the departments and the actions did not take place. I think as a consequence, after the investigation, as the nature of these things go, heads will roll. But a more important agenda is how to fix the system and ways to responding to the emergency situation effectively. I think there were some ideas. We can combine 119 and 112 for simpler process. There should be maybe increased budgets and personnel to better monitor the key risks. I think what I'm hoping for is that the President has convened a national safety review to address this issue. And I think there has to be some concrete actions coming out of this. Historically, we Koreans had the lax safety standards during the Korea's hyper-fast development period. But the safety level afterwards did not really catch up to the status and the kind of responsibility we should have a nation now. 10 years ago, we had an unfortunate and very tragic incident of the Seoul ferry disaster accident, and that was a very good opportunity to look at this issue very seriously, but that also turned to very political and did not really get enough attention. I think this is another chance and another dire call to fix the system and make Korea more safe.
Right, so public safety, a huge agenda, of course. And now, Professor CHEY, there's also been a great focus on mental health in the aftermath of this incident, not just for those who suffered during the incident and the families of those who unfortunately lost their lives. There's also support such as counselling for people like journalists and also people who have been affected emotionally by this. I mean, this is a welcome development, isn't it?
It certainly is. And when a tragedy of this magnitude occurs in a society, as a society, we really need to understand that this affects us all. And the Korean Psychological Association has been very quick to respond when the disaster occurred and offered free psychological counseling or psychotherapy to people who are in need, not only for people who were directly affected and injured or the families of the deceased, but for all people. And I would like to just mention that this is, as you said, it is kind of a new development in Korean society because Korean mental health system is still very young, and we just started the second 5-year national mental health plan in 2021, which I was involved in the planning and also the execution plans for the government. And it was the first time that we addressed the need of psychological service to all people, not only people with severe mental health issues, but for everybody. And because this is so important for preventing mental health and also when intervention is given at a very early stage of psychological suffering and stress, it has been shown that it could be met with, better outcome than just no help or feeling alone, having to deal with a lot of stress on its own.
I see. And Professor Song, well, the Yoon Suk-yeol administration seems to be doing all it can to show that it is responding. It's trying to do its best to respond quickly and transparently as well. But of course, very naturally, many people are enraged over what happened, and some groups even held rallies over the weekend in Seoul. And well, protesters, they've been calling on the administration to better serve young people in Korea in particular. And they seem pretty angry about the failure of past governments, most recently the Moon Jae-in administration, in terms of delivering social equality and justice. So in what ways have the youth been neglected?
Well, that particular problem is endemic to Korean politics, regardless of the parties, I think. The politicians over the years conveniently overlooked young people who generally don't vote and don't yet have the economic power. So MZ generation have been overlooked in many ways. But I have to point out that in recent elections, especially last Seoul mayoral elections and the presidential elections, the so-called MZ voters were recognized as at least a casting vote and were actively courted. And there were some young leaders prominently featured in a party. But the current situation is somehow those young leaders were booted out after the election. So I think that issue persists. Korea, I think at this point, needs a generational dialogue, a very serious one, and tend to issues that are numerous among the young people and very important for the future of Korea, especially the safety issues, especially how the job market is managed and how they can survive even and also thrive in the system where the social justice is guaranteed for young people.
And Professor Song, while pressure, of course, is very much needed on government, on politicians, to what extent, though, can the new administration really take responsibility for this? And as the national mourning period is over, is there a danger of this just anger turning rather political?
Well, unfortunately, I think it has already turned political to some extent. And for Yoon administration, although they have been in the power for only 6 months, well, the buck stops at whoever is currently at the top. I think that it's not just the Yoon administration, but the politicians in general, especially the lawmakers and those people who are leading the departments, should get together and really discuss this issue and pour over some ideas so that we can solve this problem once and for all. I mentioned the Seoul ferry disaster 10 years ago, but even after that, we seem to have a major accident every 10 years. We have a fire in the underground, and There, even go far back, we have collapsing bridges and buildings. And this cannot continue. And I hope this Itaewon disaster is the last of such mass disaster that Korea experiences. And that requires concerted efforts and concerted resources in this issue. And this president and administration suffering from low approval rating probably has to look at this as a chance and opportunity to show for once and for all the leadership and the ability to fix problems when it faces.
Right. Hopefully we'll look at this in a solution-oriented way. And Professor CHEY, well, many people are, of course, at this point still very confused, very angry as they try to make sense of this accident. And while these are natural emotions, how can we start to process these complex emotions instead of finding people to blame or simply falling into despair?
Well, the October 29th disaster was unique in that it happened in a very popular place where many people have visited and hung out. So not only those who were directly injured or have family members or friends, die or injured, a lot of people, including journalists and everyday citizens, can experience a great amount of shock and sometimes secondary trauma. However, people cope with crisis quite differently, and we need to recognize that. Some of it has to do with the situation that particular person is in, or the maybe the individual difference in how people cope with stress or emotional challenges. So some people, a lot of Koreans actually think it's a good idea to quietly suffer emotional pain and hold a lot inside. But unlike physical pain, which get addressed very quickly and people recognize it and treat it immediately, emotional pain and suffering can linger on if it's not really processed appropriately at the right time. So people need to recognize that we need to process the grief, the sadness, or sometimes anger inside ourselves when these kind of things happen. And in psychological, theories, when a person experiences psychological crisis, there's an external challenge, just like, when you wake up in the morning and your electricity is out, we recognize that what we have to do, we have to really not cope with not being able to put up a toaster or make a cup of coffee. But in psychological trauma, we really don't know what to do when our immediate family members or friends has just disappeared. So this is a crisis that people's resources. Sometimes some people have greater resources at hand, some people do not. And it's this imbalance of the need for having to cope with these loss and stress and the resource one has. So we have to recognize that every people have different balance. And when this kind of crisis comes, I think it is very helpful to seek help and feel okay that you're seeking help to basically a stranger. And in Korean society, this is not very common to seek help to the strangers who are, psychotherapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists, and psychiatric nurses, and social workers. And this can be very demanding. And I think it is very helpful and effective. One, we have to recognize that it could be more helpful and effective to wait until the traumatized person is ready to talk and not force. Oh, well, this is going to really help you, because that could also become a burden. And people need to feel safe. talking to somebody. And we need to make the environment safe psychologically and also physically. It has to be a safe environment. And the psychotherapy the government is able to give right now is not at this moment, may not be enough. So people need to really seek out. There are a lot of help from a lot of associations like Psychological Association, and also many other associations are giving help. So it is you need to seek out help what best fits you. And I would like to also say that lastly, that sometimes it may be the first time the person seeks psychological help and it doesn't help. The person feels that I'm better off by myself. And it could just be that the match between the psychotherapist and oneself is not perfect. And it would be helpful to talk to another professional who could also be helpful.
Well, it looks like there needs to be more efforts to really make people of Korea, people in Korea, feel safe, not just physically, but also emotionally. And of course, it's way too early to talk about closure, but in order to help our society really evolve from this, we do need more discussions, thorough investigations, and a lot of emotional support in terms of going forward. Thank you very much, Dr. Se-ryun, Professor of Law at Kyung University, and Dr. Kyung, President of Korean Psychological Association. Thank you both so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to our viewers for tuning in. Arirang's Global Insight will be back on Tuesday, Korea time. See you then, and wherever you are in the world, have a great day.